So learning first, like any other chapter, it starts with definition, meaning of learning. Learning is defined as any relatively permanent change in behavior that occurs as a result of experience. You learn something and then you actually, your the way that you behave or you way that you act would actually change. The key component in learning is its outcome. That is change in the behavior. The change may be positive, may be negative, so it could be anything. You could actually learn how to smoke. You could actually, learn how to eat. Both are possible, right? So basically, both positive, negative is like is definitely. I mean, you can learn both. Learning has to be accompanied by a change of action. So ultimately, once you learn, actually reflects. Any change that occurs in people thought process attitude does not constitute learning unless it is accompanied by change in behavior. So it is like ongoing thoughts is not something that actually comes as the learning unless and until you actually exhibit, or rather the way that you approach changes, that is where the learning really comes into picture. That is what is called as learning. The change, finally change that has to be permanent to understand that learning has taken place. So that change is something which is permanent most often. But this particular statement or even the behavior statement, change in behavior, is bit more contradicted later in the chapter because some of the scientists really challenge that learning need not exhibit the behavioral change. So change in behavior is something which might not immediately happen, is what they actually talk about, but it could actually reflect at later point of time or in a different form altogether. But nevertheless, definition or this particular key points in the definition is learning is a relatively a permanent change in behavior that occurs as a result of experience, right? So that is what you probably remember. So now we are going to theories of learning. So there are two distinct theories. One is behavioristic theory. So what behavioristic theory? Behavioristic theories mainly concentrate on there is a stimulus, and to that stimulus there is a response. So your behavior really depends on what comes as an input, or rather what exactly stimulates that behavior. So as a response you behave in that way, right? So basically uh, behavioristic theory is thought about learning as this particular stimulus is the one which is providing the relevant learning. So there is a emphasis on this connection between the stimulus and the response part of it, right? These theories are also called as connectionistic theory because we are talking about connection between stimulus and response, right? So the process of learning would go as you actually, if you try to actually give the stimulus and somebody is responding in that way, overall using the stimulus and response as the method, you actually condition or rather take through the learning, or you teach something, right? I mean, there is a classical experiment in terms of rat being or rather there are multiple theories where I think the cat related experiment was also there, where there is a bell which is associated with food. So those kind of things, right? As soon as the bell is rang, the dog really feels hungry. So something like that. So it like over the time you are teaching or you are making the person or the animal learn through this conditioning, which is giving the stimulus and associating the response with the stimulus. So in future, once you train them, as soon as the stimulus occurs, they respond in that way, right? So there are two types of theories when it comes to this particular behavioristic theory. One is called as classical conditioning, right? In this particular classical conditioning, what it is this really this stimulation happens automatically. So basically what it means is, so it is like a natural way where you are giving the conditioning, you are giving the stimulus, and then they are responding. Over the time the learning really happens, right? So but in case, so there is another conditioning which is called as operate conditioning. So I'll tell this as well, then you will understand the main difference between these two, and then we can go into details. Right? Operant condition is about, see, it is not like somebody is giving this stimulus and then response and making you learn. It is not really naturally happening. Rather, you voluntarily go to learn the behavior or to unlearn the behavior. So this is like voluntarily going and trying to actually undergo that stimulus and response, so that you actually learn over the time. Okay, so so in the first case, in the classical conditioning, stimulus is the one which is controlled. So basically, whenever stimulus happens, response is following. So in order to actually teach somebody, you continuously give the stimulus and you let that particular response follow it, right? So basically, the emphasis is on like stimulus happening naturally. In case of operant condition, it is like what you are interested is not the stimulus. You are undergoing the stimulus because you are interested in the response. You are interested in the end result. So the emphasis in case of operant conditioning is on the response. So it is the response which is of your interest, hence you are going towards the stimulus. So you know that if I work well, I am going to get the salary increment, right? So basically, let's say stimulus is like the work, and the increment is like a response, right? So basically, you are interested in the response, hence you go through that particular habit of going and involving in a project which involves more work, let's say, right? So you are going towards that stimulus and response kind of a cycle. Whereas in classical conditioning, you are actually conditioning the stimulus so that you learn know that particular stimulus and response cycle. Okay, so there are so when it comes to classical conditioning, it is actually a very passive way of learning things, right? It only represents very small part of entire learning. So it is not like this behavioral stimulus and response kind of a model. It doesn't really constitute all kind of learnings that we do, right? There are various types of learning which we are going to actually learn down, but yeah, it is very very limited. So classical learning, yes, even though the experiments related to rat or dog or whatever, it is mostly done on the animals, but it is very much applicable to the organizational context as well. So there is one example which is given in IGNOU where, let's say, in a factory, you are actually cleaning the factory before any big visit, let's say. If there is an inspection that happens, you clean the factory, and you also ask employees to actually wear nice dress so that the inspection really goes through well. So over the time, if this cleaning and well-dressed nature are correlated, so it might so happen that whenever you clean the factory, workers will actually wear the nice dress because they associate wearing the nice dress with cleaning of the factory. Even though the reason or where it started might be a different case of inspection, but there is actually a stimulus and response kind of a nature that would actually, occur in that way. So that is about classical conditioning and operant conditioning. Okay, so now cognitive theories. We are going, so we kind of talked about behavioristic theories which are associated with stimulus and response. Now we are going into cognitive theories. Okay, so basically here it really goes into the details of how thought process really works, right? So the above theory, which is behavior, is mainly concentrating on cause and effect kind of a thing, where stimulus and then response. So this goes into the details of, okay, yeah, how human beings think, how exactly they approach certain things. So all these cognitive theories really depend on the way that our thought process works, right? So it also attributes the capacity for expectations and cognitive structures to animals. So basically, animals and humans, so animals are widely studied as far as the along with the humans, right? So basically, all these theories are associated with the way that both humans or animals really have the structures within, right? So basically, it is more of science which is associated with our thought process, brain development, etc., etc., right? So next is cognitive. So under cognitive theories, we are talking about cognitive mapping. Okay. So cognitive mapping is about, it is like you are learning something. Okay. So while once you learn something in your brain, there is a map that you actually form. There is some representation of whatever that you learned is actually built into your internal structures, whether you call it as neurons or some whatever the way that it really stores. But there is a map that is formed internal to your brain. Okay. So most important part that you need to understand here is this map need not to be exactly mapping to that particular situation or that particular learning. What it could happen is in certain you might actually learn certain things in a certain environment, right? But when there is a similar thing that really happens in a different context, even though it is not directly what you have learned, you will be able to map that to this particular thing, whatever that is stored in your representation. Okay. So you will be able to actually pick up certain things which you learned, and still, even though the context is different, you will be able to apply your learning in those different situations as well, right? So that is exactly what cognitive mapping is all about, right? So there is an example, or rather an experiment that was conducted to demonstrate the same, again with rats. I don't know why all experiments happen with the rat, but what is actually done is, there is a maze that is created along with water, and rats were allowed to actually go and explore that maze. So they did swimming in that particular water and find out solution to that maze. So they learned how to swim across and cross that maze. So they did swim and then cross that maze. So the same rats which actually learned this particular maze in the water condition, they dried up this particular maze and allowed them to walk within the maze. They were able to walk out of the maze. That means whatever the learning that they had when it was actually they had to swim, they were able to apply even during their walk. Basically, they were able to map the solution from there, or learning from there, to a different situation where we are talking about no water. So that is what is the cognitive mapping is all talking about, right? So cognitive interpretations are more appropriate in cases where people use what they have learned by observation in choosing a course of action. So it's like you are observing something and then you are actually learning it. So it need not to be like stimulus and response here. You are seeing something, you are observing something, and that is also something that you are able to map it within your brain. So learning is more about forming those internal representation. That is exactly what cognitive mapping is also trying to say, right? Learning may not be directly observed in the behavior. So here, this is the point which it is talking about, apart from the behavior theory, where in sometimes learning may not be observed directly, right? You might have learned something during childhood. You might have actually, um, uh, observed few things while you are actually kid, and they might actually come out when you become adult in some other situation. So you can't really perceive there is a behavioral change that has happened. So it need not to be a directly observed behavior change when this particular learning happens. You don't know, and sometimes the way the learning comes out is entirely a different behavior altogether in a different context. So you can't really directly observe it, right? It wants us to assume that performance is completely different what person knows. Okay, so basically it is also saying that the way that person performs need not represent what exactly he knows as well. So he might be knowing a lot different, a lot better or a lot different things. So you can't really judge a person based on the performance. That is exactly what it is saying. That all the latent learning that has stored within us will come to our help when we are faced in a similar kind of situation or task. So when we are in a different kind of situation, or rather, it would come out in various ways. So there is one more aspect which is about this cognitive mapping is the way that we learn is based on trial and error. So basically so there is a chimpanzee experiment where they give an instrument using which they can actually take the eatables or bananas or whatever it is. Chimpanzees does various trial and error, and then finally they learn to take that particular banana using that equipment. So they learned the art of using that equipment by trial and error, and they finally succeed. So here what we are doing is the way that learning happen is sudden. Basically, yes, I tried, failed, and then I succeeded. So there is a sudden learning that happened that, oh yeah, this is the correct way of doing it. Okay. And once I know how the correct way of doing it, I now know how to use it in future as well. Right? Yes, I discovered the availability. So now it is available. That skill is available to me and it is transferable. So now I know how to use this instrument. Now I know how to take the banana. I know how to take something else as well using that instrument. So I can use the same learnability in various other situations. So this is what is that three critical aspects that was learned during this particular chimpanzee solution or whatever it is, the experiment, right? So learning using trial and error. So it signifies suddenness, its availability once discovered, and it is transferability. So this is how learning really happened in this case. Okay, now from cognitive theories, we are transitioning into the social learning theory. Okay, before going there, quick emphasis on the questions that actually, really, occur in this particular chapter, right? So these are the questions which really, uh, asked in this particular chapter. So one question which we learned just now is the cognitive mapping. Okay, this has been asked twice for 6 marks. The other question that was asked is explain any two theories of learning. So we have learned a couple of theories which is related to operant conditioning, classical conditioning, and now even cognitive mapping for that matter. So you could actually write any of the two theories that you would want to. So until now, whatever that you learned, these are the two main aspects. So thing for you to remember most is the cognitive mapping to some extent, right? So this is asked twice. So now going into social learning theory, okay? So even in social learning theory, the important aspects, principles of social learning theory, okay, one of the important questions. But what is social learning theory, right? So social learning theory states that people learn not only from their own experiences, but also observing what happens to other people. So it is not just your experience. You actually go see people, see what they are actually undergoing, what they are doing, what is the result of their particular doing, and you learn. Okay. So it is not even the told learning, even untold things you observe and actually learn, right? So basically, that is what social learning theory is all about. What are the general principles of social learning? Okay, this is one of the questions that was asked. So general elucidate the principles of social learning, and it was asked thrice. Okay, so what exactly are the principles of social learning? People can learn by observing the behavior of others and the outcomes of those behaviors. This is exactly what we talked about social learning. Learning can occur without any change in behavior. So this is same as whatever that we talked in cognitive mapping. So the behavior change is not immediate. You can't really observe the behavior change immediately, even though something that you learned. Okay, so it might actually manifest in some other situation, in some other way, it may be in future time, right? Cognition plays a role in learning. So basically you see, right? I mean, you see, you listen, you feel, etc., etc. All cognitive abilities plays a role in learning. Awareness and expectations of future reinforcements or punishments can have major effect on the behaviors that people exhibit, right? You understanding what is the repercussions, what exactly are the rewards that I'm going to get, what are the punishments that I'm going to get, would also have a major role as far as the learning is concerned. So if you see that somebody murdered something and he got a hanging as the punishment, you would not really go and murder somebody, right? So that is what we are talking about here. Social learning theory can be considered a bridge or a transition between behavioristic learning theories and cognitive learning theories. So this is like kind of an intermediate between whatever that we talked about in the behavioral theory and cognition theory. Okay, so this is like a motherhood statement, which says that maybe this is actually falling into intermediate line where between these two theories. Okay, so now we are going to Banduna's reinforcement model. Okay, we talked about these reinforcements and punishments here as far as one of the principle of social learning, right? So Banduna came up with a reinforcement model, and what he is saying is, so there are various models here which he is talking about. Model here is nothing but the person you are actually seeing and learning. So when we are talking about model here, you are talking where you are learning from, right? That is the model that he is talking about. So observer is reinforced by the model. Okay, so basically you see a person, and based on that you are actually understanding the reward that that person really got, and then observer or you, whoever is learning, is getting reinforced. Basically you observe that somebody got a gift because you did so and so. Now you understood that, okay, yes, there is something that I need to learn. Example, a student who changes a dress to fit with a certain group of students has a strong likelihood of being accepted, thus reinforced by that group, right? So he, I mean, getting rewarded because he is part of that particular group. The others are also wearing that particular group, and he trying to be part of that particular group is reinforced here. Okay, so observer is reinforced by a third person, where he sees a class leader's behavior, how he is rewarded, and then he is reinforcing this particular behavior based on that third person, a class leader or a hero or whatever it is. The imitated behavior itself leads to reinforcing consequences. Okay, so basically, if let's say if somebody did something and they got that particular consequence, you trying to imitate that behavior also leading to that consequence would actually reinforce. So it is going to improve, or rather it is going to, I mean, so basically you saw somebody bunking a class, enjoying, you also did that and then enjoyed. So now your habit of bunking would really go up, right? So basically that is what is the reinforcement that it is talking about. Consequences of the model's behavior affect the observer's behave vicariously. So basically here vicariously is talking is nothing but it's like amplifying the response basically. Doing it, I mean, the reinforcement which is actually increasing the intensity of the response that it is actually giving, right? Something that you are actually doing and it is just increasing the response, it is just increasing your behavior towards it, right? So that is what is the vicarious reinforcement that is being taught. Okay, the model is reinforced for a response, and then observer shows an increase in the same response. It is the same response, but that same response really increases. As you do it, your actually pleasure increases, or rather your reinforcement really is increasing, amplifying. Okay. So now we are going into contemporary social learning perspective of reinforcement and punishment. Okay, rather it is theory which says that reinforcement and punishment indirectly affects on learning. So this every one of us know, obviously. Even behavior theory is all talking about the same, the response and stimulus to some extent. Reinforcement and punishment influence the extent to which individual exhibits a behavior that has been learned, right? So to what extent they do it or to what extent they learn depends on what is the reinforcement which is associated with it. Okay, so the expectations of reinforcement increases this cognitive process or promote learning. Something which is very, very important is something that you are more attentive on, right? If somebody says that there is going to be an exam, you are more attentive while actually reading it or while learning it, or if somebody is teaching a class, right? So basically, your span of attention is also depending on your expectations or rather your reinforcement influences. Okay, so that is what is the third point. So now going into the cognitive factors of factors in social learning, right? Learning without performance. So kind of, I mean, uh, so these five are something that is given as without any explanation. So I'm not too sure that uh, what exactly are the expectations from this one, right? So I mean, there are only few aspects which were actually explained as far as the book is concerned. One is modeling. So basically, model, as I told, is the model or the person that we are actually seeing and learning, right? So there are two types of model which is possible: live model and symbolic model. Live model is in real life you're seeing him or seeing her and learning. Symbolic model is more about you seeing in a movie a character, you learn something from the way Superman behaves. And so this is like more symbolic model that is there, right? Reciprocal causation. Each of these three variables, basically, there are three variables which could influence the entire thing. The obviously the person, behavior, and the environment. It is you, the behavior part, and the environment can all three variables can influence each other, right? So that is what the reciprocal causation is talking about. Okay, so I take you through that. But anyway, that is something that is an unimportant section which was never asked as such. So this is the section that we are talking about. So when we talked about this learning with performance, it says makes a distinction between learning through observation and the actual imitation of what has been learned. I don't understand what exactly you intend to say here. Um, Social learning theories
It can be
contended that
walking.
attention is
Praveen
critical.
can be Praveen can be walking, for example. So you are learning it by looking at someone else walking. So you are doing it and trying to imitate, and you are learning it. Now there are
But what
something
is without performance here?
without performance. You are not trying it now. So for example, let's say trading. So trading, you are observing other people for 5 months. You are not really trading. You just learn the tricks in your mind. You don't imitate yet. Then you learn it anyway. But you can use the learning later if you want.
Yeah, but what is the distinction between these two?
That I don't know. There is some distinction. Yeah. Cognitive difference. Okay. Cognitive difference.
What is the difference? Yes, probably yes, you learn, you see and learn, and you actually do and learn, but there is some distinction or some observation which is not really talked about here. But anyway.
Hmm. During what is that? During what? Cognitive
So
processing.
attention part anyway we talked about. So basically attention plays a very, very important role as far as the learning is concerned, right? So people form expectations about the consequence. What exactly you expect out of it is also something that which is very, very important as far as your expectations, your learning is concerned. So if you expect in a better way, then you actually have a better attention, and attention do play a role. Okay, behaviors that can be learned through modeling, right? So there are basically there are a lot of things that you actually learn by observing people, by going through that particular observational learning, right? So children can, I mean, some of the examples are children can become aggressive when they observe their aggressive or violent models. If parents are aggressive, children will learn those particular aggressive part. right? Even the moral behavior is something that children will silently observe and actually, get those particular learnings, right? So conditions necessary for effective modeling to occur. Okay, what are the conditions under which you actually go through this particular learning? Your attention, basically you need to be very attentive to actually grasp. You need to retain, so you need to actually go and store it in your memory. You should be capable of reproducing it, right? For example, kids might actually observe your behavior. They might even store your behavior, but they might not be able to reproduce what you're doing because they are not capable of doing it, right? And obviously, your inherent motivation in doing all this learning. So these are the four conditions which are necessary to make your learning effective using this particular modeling aspect, right? So effects of modeling on behavior. It teaches new behaviors. So basically, what would happen on your behavior? It would teach new behavior because you are learning. I think any learning will actually have a new behavior for that matter. Whether it is immediately perceived or later, it is a different case. Influences the frequency of previously learned behavior, may encourage previously forbidden behavior. So you have actually, there are certain things which are forbidden in your previous thing, but you see others and then later on realize that this is not really a forbidden behavior. Increases the frequency of similar behavior. So you might actually increase the frequency at which you are going to do that. Okay, somebody is doing it so frequently, you see somebody walking frequently and then reducing the rate, maybe you will actually increase your walking rate, right? Self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is one thing which is asked in the exam, right? So basically these sections that we went through was never asked except the general principles of social learning. Nothing was asked. So the next question which was asked is self-efficacy. Okay. So basically, what is self-efficacy? So in a way, you can say that it is the confidence of an individual to actually carry on a task or attain the necessary performance by doing that, right? So it is like, I mean, in a very simplistic term, it is like confidence, your confidence on that particular behavior, right? Capacity to execute that particular behavior. So, so people are more likely to engage in certain behaviors when they believe they are capable. So if there is a high self-efficacy, then there are more chances that you would actually get engaged in certain behavior. If you don't have confidence, probably you will keep, I mean, you will be, keeping away from those particular things. So that is exactly what this is talking about, right? How self-efficacy affects the behavior. So this is one question which was asked, right? Tell, I mean, talk about self-efficacy as three marks question, right? So joy of activities. Okay, so basically, if you have confidence, you would have more joy, and because you would actually feel that you can actually enjoy the success in doing it, right? Effort and persistence. Okay, they put more effort and the activities where they cut. So if they think that they will be successful, then only they will put effort. They will persist with it. If they think that they can't really succeed in it, that effort will fade down. Even the persistence will actually come down over the time. Learning and achievement. Okay, so students with high self-efficacy tend to be, better students. They learn it in a better way. So that confidence really adds a lot of value. Factors in the development of self-efficacy. Okay. So in general, typically have a good sense of, so in general, people judge themselves in a right way. So a lot of people would know what exactly they can do better, what exactly they cannot. Okay. So based on that, they actually, develop that self-efficacy over the time. So one point that I wanted to actually put, because this I found it interesting. A lot of gaming apps put emphasis on developing the self-efficacy. So that is why they start with easy levels to give you the confidence, right? As you gain the confidence over the time, they keep on increasing the challenge, right? That is one way of actually developing the self-efficacy. Why they want to develop the self-efficacy? Because they want you to be addicted to it. They want you to actually keep on putting the effort and persistence on it. If it continues to be easy in the same way, there is no challenge, there is no motivation in doing that way, right? At the same time, if they give most difficult level upfront, you will not have confidence to even proceed. So you might actually not play that particular game at all. So gaming apps do actually apply this concept of self-efficacy. Self-regulation is in a way, it is self-evident as far as the name is concerned. So it is like regulating yourself in setting the standards or goals, or observing yourself, judging how you are reacting to various situations, right? Self-instruction. Okay. So basically you are really gaining, or rather teaching, yourself and guide your behavior using various steps, right? So basically, using external guidance, self-guidance, or I don't know what this shaded self-guidance and covert self-instruction is concerned, but these are the 5 steps that it talks about how you are actually learning by yourself, right? So even in this particular case, there is not much of a text and never asked as a question. It's just given as points, 5 points, that's all. Okay, self-instructions as a points. But I don't really think that it is something which is going to come in exam. It was never asked and nor explained in the text, except these 5 points. Okay, so so what it really means to self-instruction, I could not decode. So now coming to principles of learning. Okay, so basically in principles of learning, most experts agree that reinforcement is most important than punishment. So basically, yes, punishment will also teach you or make you learn that you should not do this. But reinforcement is a better technique. So rewarding when people are doing right is a better technique when compared to punishing them when they do it wrong, right? So basically that is what is the emphasis here. So Thorndike's, he came in our first year as well, if you remember, in theories of intelligence, if I'm not wrong. So basically he came up with something called as a law of effect. Okay, so what that law of effect says, of several responses made to the same, what it is exact words. Okay, of several responses made to the same situation, those which are accompanied or closely followed by satisfaction will be more likely to reoccur. And those with accompanied closely with discomfort will less likely to be occur. So what he is saying is, with this very complex word of law of effect, okay, he is saying that if you are reinforced in and satisfied, then there is more likely that you will repeat. When you are punished, there is more likely that you would not really repeat. Okay, this appeared to be very common sense, but somehow it is called as a law effect from Thorndike. Okay, so if it is reinforced, there are more chances that you will do it. If it is punished, there are more chances that in future you might not do it, right? So you might actually not do it. There are some expectations to it. For instances, person's cognitive rationalization may neutralize this law. So this is an important point. So actual law seems to be like a common sense, but this is something which is as an added point, where saying that this might not be true always. Maybe you apply your rational logic and might actually change your opinion in future. So yes, you might have actually saw reinforcement, doing it is going to actually increase it, but your rational view could actually change this particular perception, right? So limitations, and so one of the limitation. Okay, so it is not an overall theory of learning. It is only talking about reinforcement and its factors, right? So this is not like universal law of learning. This is just about reinforcement. So other principle of learning is reinforcement. Reinforcement is defined as anything that increases the strength of the response and also induces repetition of the behavior that preceded the reinforcement. Okay. So a reward is something that person presents. So this is actually very, very self-explanatory. Everyone knows what exactly is the reinforcement. Okay. One point which needs to be highlighted in this is reinforcement is not same as reward. Okay, sometimes even though you are rewarded, you might not be motivated enough to do that particular activity. So one example that is given in this particular textbook, which connected well, is, let's say there is a scenario where you found a defect, okay, in the code, and you actually told that this is what is the defect. So manager called everybody and he explained about the defect and he rewarded you, saying that, okay, yeah, you found this particular defect. But at the same time, when he was explaining, the person who was cause of that defect, somebody else or your friend or somebody, is the reason for that defect. And he is evidently dissatisfied because that particular defect has been talked in public. So you got a reward from your manager, but at the same time, you also felt that your friend was actually demeaned. So this reward is something that you don't want in future. So you might not be really, your behavior is not reinforced. So maybe in future you would not really tell about the defect that you found to your manager, because you will feel that if you tell the defect, your friend might be affected, right? So reward is not same as the reinforcement. That is the point here. There are two types of reinforcement: positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. So positive reinforcement is about giving a reward when there is something that you have done it right. Negative reinforcement, point to highlight here, to underline, is negative reinforcement is different from punishment. Everybody might think that negative reinforcement is punishment. No, 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 no. Punishment is different. What is negative reinforcement then? Okay, so negative reinforcement is nothing but, let's say you told your kid that you cannot actually see the TV unless and until he or she finishes the syllabus for the exam. Once you read it, then only you can actually, see the TV. So you are actually then lifting the ban on the TV when he finishes the syllabus. So it is like, ban is in a negative way, right? I mean, it is not giving something. It is like lifting something when he does it right, is what is the negative reinforcement. Right? It is like, okay, telling an employee that I will not give you salary unless and until you fix this defect. Right? In general, salary should be there, but you are actually putting a ban so that he is motivated to finish or fix that particular defect, and then lifting it. So you are rewarding him. It is not still punishment, but it is a negative way of reinforcing it. Okay. So it is not like you are telling that you are going to give an extra salary hike if they fix the defect. Then it becomes a positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement, you are telling that I will not give you salary unless you fix it. That is negative reinforcement. Okay. So schedule for reinforcement, continuous reinforcement, intermittent reinforcement. I don't know whether you remember it or not. We spoke about this particular topic even in motivation, where you can have this continuous reinforcement and intermittent reinforcement. Continuous is nothing but whenever somebody fixes the defect, I am going to reward it. Okay, intermittent is, I'm going to actually recognize somebody for a quarterly performance. Whoever performed well, whoever fixed the maximum number of defects, I'm going to reward him quarterly. And sometimes it might so happen that I might say that after 10 defect fixes, I'm going to reward you. So it could be based on events, it could be based on time, and it could be random as well. So that is the intermittent reinforcement. And we also talked about in the other chapter that intermittent reinforcement is a better technique when compared to continuous reinforcement. Sometimes what will happen is continuous reinforcement will have immediate effect. So as soon as you lift, then it is going to act in a negative way. Now no more defects are rewarded, so I will not go and fix the defect. So it is visible immediately. Intermittent reinforcement is long-term in nature when compared to the continuous. Right? So in order to actually cultivate long-term culture, intermittent reinforcement is the way that is suggested. Okay. So now coming to the punishment, I don't think punishment needs a lot of explanation. Everybody knows what exactly punishment is. It is causing an unpleasant consequence to response to prevent a person from repeating that behavior. You want to restrict a certain behavior, You are giving an unpleasant consequence to it, to that particular person. That is what is punishment. Okay, so now coming to one more important question that came up in the exam, which is extinction. So what is extinction? Extinction is eliminating a reinforcement. There is something that you are actually getting, and you are actually eliminating the reinforcement. Basically, you are not rewarding it. Hence, that behavior extinct over the time, because there is no more reward. So you are actually removing the reward. Hence, over the time, that behavior is died down, right? So while conditioning is about creating the desired behavior, okay, it is desirable to eradicate other behavior. So basically, that is what is the extinction is. So you are actually eradicating certain behavior by removing the enforcement. Right? Natural extinction is the behavior that has been created may become extinct if they are not fully maintained. Okay. So basically, in some cases, because of maintenance, you're not able to maintain it. Hence, naturally, this extinction really happens. Over the time, it is ignored. Hence, the extinction naturally happens. You don't intend to extend it. Basically, it is like a natural extinction because over the time it got diluted. Right? So an important factor here that conditioning must be maintained. Okay, and with sufficiently frequent rehearsals, re-stimulation and response for the pattern to continue over time. So making sure that natural extinction doesn't happen, conditions should be maintained. And with frequent rehearsals, re-stimulation and response and pattern to continue over the time. So over the time, things needs to be maintained so that it continues to exist. That is exactly what natural, to eliminate this natural extinction, right? So now predictability of stimulus. Okay, so these are like various things as far as this extinction is concerned, right? So what could actually cause this particular stimulus? So we talked about natural extinction. So this is another thing where predictability of stimulus. If the condition has been created with regular and predictable reward and punishment, then the absence of reward or punishment will quickly lead to extinction. You have been giving it every quarter, there is an award that you are giving it, and suddenly you lifted quarterly awards altogether, right? It was predictable, it was regular. You removed it, it immediately leads to extinction. So now it registers into people's mind very, very immediately. It is not a slow process, rather predictability is lost, people register it quickly. That is exactly the point is. Extinction to customizing. Okay, so basically what it is being talked is, if there is a stimulus, okay, so it's like there is certain thing that is actually happening, and you are actually making sure that people are used to it, so it becomes a habit. You are making sure that fixing the defect becomes a habit. Okay, then you don't really have to stimulate it anymore. Okay, so you might not, somebody might actually uh, so it becomes a behavior. Okay, and so sometimes, or rather, to give a better example, maybe defect is a wrong example here. So to give a better example, let's say a manager is shouting at you, and shout earlier, when he shouts, you feel that he is disturbed and you might actually correct your performance. Let's say he is shouting very frequently every day, then that shouting will not impact you in any way. So that stimulus is gone. You are accustomed to that particular stimulus. So it becomes the behavioral aspect of that particular manager. So I think that this is a better example than before. Extinction through accustomizing it, right? Desensitization. Okay, so this is one more question that came for 3 marks. What is desensitization? Right? It is the intensity of the emotion they feel may well become dulled with familiarity. As you become very familiar with the stimulus, the emotion that results out of that stimulus becomes very, very dull. So earlier, when somebody says that there is an issue that is escalated, we used to feel worried. Oh, okay, now there is an escalation. Now My boss will call me and I need to explain, or my boss's boss will call me, I will have to explain. So all these things would actually come into picture. But if there are frequent escalations that you are actually, accustomed over the time, so now you know how that particular thing really works. You know how to deal with escalation. Now you will not be worried. You will not be so so worried about the escalation anymore, right? Inoculation. Okay, it is like very, very evident in medical field. Inoculation is nothing but vaccination kind of a thing, where you are giving a weakened form to the people to experience, so that they are very well prepared when it comes to the bigger impact or bigger thing. When bigger thing also happens, they are no more worried, because you have been giving the vaccination and making them actually experience that particular thing in smaller ways all the time. Extinction through extreme experience. Okay, so this is like an example where let's say once upon a time, from my experience, I could recall one example where I went for a theme park in when I was outside India. I went for a theme park. So it had multiple rides, right? And what happened is, we happened to take a ride which is very, 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 very difficult as soon as we entered into the park, right? So it was like a tower where you will actually sit in a seat, and there will be a free fall from the tower, and that seat is just like one chair, so it is not like a cage or something like that. It will only seat belt that would be there as far as the chair is concerned. It was a frightening experience. We were all frightened. We went to that particular ride, took that particular ride. But once we took that ride, every other ride in that particular theme park really appeared very like kiddish. Actually, every other ride is also equally thing, but it is like that extreme experience which actually dulled down rest all experiences. That is what is the extinction through extreme experience, right? So reversing the breakdown. So we talked about those conditionings, right? So if you actually create some very, very unusual experience, right? Dog hearing the bell, it goes for the food or whatever it is. Let's say hearing the bell, you give a near-death experience to the same dog, whichever is conditioned. Then it will forget whatever the learning that it has got with the bell associated with happy feeling of getting the food, right? It will forget everything. So it's extinction through reversing the breakdown. Okay. So flooding. Stimulus is constantly applied and more extreme responses encouraged until there is a sudden reversal. So this is similar to this extreme experience, but here it is about repeatedly giving that particular extreme experience where it actually dies down over the time. Okay. So aversion therapy is about giving a punishment and making sure that it extincts. So this is all about extinction. Okay, so the question was asked on extinction. Question was asked on desensitization. Okay, so that's all is about Unit 1. That is principles and process of learning.